everybody, welcome back to the Lytton Lang Gang, and this is a bonus episode being uploaded for the weekend. Exciting stuff for you. Which is about a level 9 response. It's on an inspector course, so it's something a little bit different. You've got myself and
Miss Gough,
and we're just going to go through a level 9 response on Gerald from an inspector course.
Cracking conversation, analytical interpretation, and igniting imagination with the Lytton Lang Gang.
Okay, so today we are looking at a character question for an inspector course, and it's how is Gerald presented as an untrustworthy character in an inspector course? Now, to help you with this, we have uploaded the document I am looking at to the VLE. Historically, all of the podcasts were on the VLE, but I've taken those down now in favour of them being on YouTube. And instead, I'm using the same area of the VLE to upload any kind of resources that might be useful. So my annotated, what's it called? Anthology is on there. Thank you, Miss Gough.
That's all right.
You can tell it's Friday, can't you?
Yeah.
Annotated anthology is on there. And equally, this whole essay is on there. If you go on, you will just find it under the inspector course section, and it's called Gerald Level 9 Annotated. And when you look at it, it's very brightly coloured because I've highlighted all of AO1 in yellow, AO2 in blue, AO3 in pink, and any quotations in green. And then down the right-hand side of the screen, if you've got this open in front of you, and it'd be a really good idea to have this now. So if you haven't already, pause this, go get the document, and then come back. Down the side, when you hover over all the little annotations, it shows you specifically which bits of the essay that's referring to. So you can just go through and you can see all the different sections. I haven't annotated every single part because I'm going to talk through it here with you, but hopefully you'll find this useful. To begin with, what we're going to do is just read through the essay as a whole, get a feel for it, and try to hear it and understand why this gets high grades. Okay, so just to reiterate, the question is, how is Gerald presented as an untrustworthy character in an inspector calls? During the course of the play and inspector calls, Gerald can be seen as a key manipulator, not only to the characters in the play, but also to the audience. He clearly can be viewed as a bridge between the older and younger generations, but also can be seen to be the key instigator in removing any guilt and responsibility from the older generation. Before the inspector arrives, we realise Gerald's sycophantic nature when he has every intention of impressing Mr. and Mrs. Burling. Gerald's declarations that he insists on being one of the family could imply that he's a little too good to be true, especially coupled with the fact that he was awfully busy at the works over last summer. This foreshadowing of his later confession to the inspector should make both audiences of post-war Britain and modern day more than a little uneasy, as there's a keen suggestion that he's been up to no good. Furthermore, if we consider his opening stage direction, we can see that Priestley describes him as too manly to be a dandy. Considering we meet a character in Act 1 who, for all intents and purposes, is very much a dandy, we can start to see that the manly side of his personality makes him untrustworthy and a dangerous character, however much he tries to appear the opposite. It seems, however, the characters on stage do not realise this, as contextually, Gerald has a superior status to the Burlings. This means that they, like many of the time, would be far too happy to overlook any misdemeanours he has suggested in order to make a good marriage for their family. During the inspector's interrogation, Gerald's untrustworthy nature seems to shine through even more. Before he leaves in Act 2, despite his seemingly honest confession of his dealings with Daisy Renton, we can question the validity of his actions as his actions and his speech tell very different stories. He states that he saved Daisy from the advances of Alderman Meggerty, but we can in fact question that he admired Daisy's soft brown hair and big dark eyes and wanted her for himself. He claims to be rather more upset by this business than he probably appears to be, which may make an audience member wonder why he does not appear to be upset at all. Gerald had a very intimate relationship with Daisy, so his lack of emotions, presented by a lack of stage direction for the actor, could show that he is callous and perhaps doesn't care at all. Furthermore, the punctuation suggests Gerald struggles to conjure the noun upset, an apparently easy word, suggesting that all of this is an act. If we consider events that happen off stage, he claims to need to leave the house to be alone, yet while out he searches for a police officer to question if Inspector Gall is in fact an inspector. This seems to present someone with ulterior motives to the ones he states. We've seen Gerald's uncanny ability to lie in Act 1, so it should come as no shock that he could also lie to the inspector and the audience, making us suspicious of him. Finally, after the inspector leaves, any remorse Gerald claimed to feel in Act 2 has completely vanished and has been replaced with a calculated plan focusing on how to distance himself from the dead girl and his involvement. He could be seen as the perfect son-in-law for Mr. and Mrs. Burling, as it is his plan that helps them let themselves off the hook. Mrs. Burling contends he has argued this very cleverly, which shows that the characters we openly dislike hold him responsible for the freedom from their guilt. Just as the Inspector and Sheila can be seen as a catalyst for change, Gerald is a catalyst for the lack of responsibility. He bluntly states that everything's all right now, but it's far from it. The way he holds up the ring for Sheila to re-accept is symbolic of his capitalist ideologies that his status and money means he is, once again, an ideal match for Sheila despite his deceptions. For him, one of his key ruses has been feigning love for her when really their marriage is a business alliance which he is desperately trying to restore. Overall, Gerald is the least trustworthy character of all presented on stage, and perhaps Priestley's biggest triumph as a playwright is that Gerald's manipulative actions extend to the audience. Audiences of all time periods are likely to leave the theatre despising characters such as Mr. and Mrs. Burling, and Gerald seems to be an afterthought. Despite some sympathy for him from the audience that even the Inspector suggests he has earned, it seems he has done little to warrant it. A modern audience may argue that in making her happy, Gerald has had the biggest impact on Daisy or Eva's depression. Yet he is possibly the character who feels the least amount of guilt for his actions, even to a point where he gives others permission to forget what they have learnt too. He has a lot to lose from the Inspector's visit, as his class and status means he has even further to fall than the other characters. However, as he is so unscrupulous, it is likely that he will hardly be held as responsible as he certainly is. Reading that, trying not to make a mistake is impossible.
Oh, yeah.
So, reading through that, I think it'd be hard not to give that a 9.
Yeah.
It's a different interpretation of Gerald.
Yeah.
And in the annotations down the side, you might realise there's places where I say, like, this is one interpretation of Gerald as a character. Don't forget, he's very much the middleman too.
Yeah.
But since the question was stated, how is he presented as an untrustworthy character? If you've got a point to make that is different, interesting, and this is not just Gerald, this is any text, then go for it. Make it different and see the things in the text that others don't. The words on the mark scheme are perceptive, judicious. I can't remember the other ones at the very top. Perceptive, judicious,
Mark scheme.
Convincing, critical.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Critical, exploratory, judicious, perceptive. These are all words that come up at the top.
Conceptualised.
Yeah.
There as well.
Which means that you're not just presuming you know the answer for a level 9. You're exploring an idea, considering interpretations. And a few of the annotations down the side that states why this answer gets a very good grade state that it doesn't overlook the obvious meanings. No. The obvious meanings are embedded in there, but then they take an alternative view on them and present them in a slightly more mature way. So we'll start by looking at the introduction. If you hover over the first annotation, it just says a theoretical introduction. Miss Gough, you talk about theoretical introductions, don't you?
Yeah. So I try to relate it to like how you do experiments in science. So you have your hypothesis, and then your experiment tries to prove or disprove that. Yeah. Obviously, you want to prove your point in a literature statement and an essay. So your thesis statement is basically this overarching idea that you return to in your paragraphs. So that's why it's really, really important that you plan, especially if you are doing something like that.
Yeah,
because
8s and 9s.
Yeah, if you are putting that in your introduction, you want to return to that consistently.
Yeah. And if you look here, at no point does this essay say, in this essay I am going to, at no point are they saying things in the introduction that are repeating. It's not repeating the question, except for maybe the word, I'm trying to see if it even uses the word untrustworthy. I don't think it does, but it wouldn't even...
synonyms or like associations with it. Yeah.
Exactly. But even using the word untrustworthy wouldn't be the end of the world, because you're just showing the examiner you've understood what the question focus is. But it's just clearly doing an overarching view of the essay, essentially how is Gerald presented, and it's an idea that you would come back to at the end.
Yeah.
It's nice and mature.
Yeah.
The next annotation down just says, note how each paragraph opens. This essay has been planned and follows a structure. So this is in red, and if you hover over that, it just shows you the first one. But if you scroll down, you'll see that each paragraph says, before the inspector arrives, during the inspector's interrogation, and finally after the inspector leaves. So what the candidate has done here is they've clearly had a little look and gone, okay, so my essay, Gerald, I'm going to look before inspector, during inspector, after inspector.
Signposting.
It's signposting, exactly. Yeah. The exam board like this because I look at that. This candidate's clearly planned.
Yeah.
They knew what was going into each paragraph, the order they were putting them in. It's not like they've randomly started with Act 3 for no reason.
No.
If you had a reason to, that's one thing, but there is a reason there's this bit at the beginning, this bit in the middle, and this bit at the end.
Yeah.
Which is really nice. You might also notice, and I'll just mention it here, that the language, the lexis, is quite advanced. This is AO4. You get AO4 for this question, which is your spelling, punctuation and grammar. But equally, this does play into AO1, because I think when you look at that convincing, perceptive, those words, I think you've got to be writing a little bit more maturely. So using Gerald's sycophantic nature, it's basically just saying he's a bit of a suck-up.
Yeah.
He does everything you want, like the perfect son-in-law should do.
Yeah.
But it's worded nicely, and actually, when you learn some of this tier 2, higher level vocabulary, it means you use less words. It's a bit quicker.
Yeah, you get to the point, and that's where it starts to verge into that convincing and critical.
Yeah.
And it's especially when you are reading essays like this, when there are points that are considered that you might not have necessarily thought of yourself, but they're presented in a way that you're like, I can see that.
Yeah.
And that's where you're like, ooh,
convincing.
this is good. This
You
is
go,
convincing.
Because I'm sure many teachers would look at this and go, I've never thought about that, Gerald, that way.
Yeah, I wouldn't have.
And I'm not saying this is the right interpretation of Gerald, it's an interpretation of Gerald. But it's argued convincingly.
Yes.
So by the end, you feel convinced, don't you? You're like,
you do.
that candidate's really made a point.
Yeah, definitely.
If you have a look at some of the quotations which are highlighted in green as well, I've only highlighted it on the first one, but if you see anything where it's got he insists, and you see that S is bracketed by a square bracket, that just means the actual quotation is, and I insist on being one of the family. But if we put the insists on, then it makes sense in the sentence.
Grammatically, yeah.
Grammatically.
Yeah.
And you're welcome to do that. It allows you to embed your quotations, and it just shows the examiner, I've put this into my own words, I've changed it slightly to make it fit.
Make it fit.
Again, I think the example quite like that. It's nice and...
Yeah. And even seeing it here on the page, I know you wouldn't colour code your response, but you should have that judicious nature to the quotations you're using. And you've even annotated it here. There are elements where they could be quite considered quite simple quotations, but because they're mixed in with some thoughtful quotations from elsewhere in the play, and the analysis is so good, you can use them. You're more than welcome to use those more simple.
And you marked for the exam board, didn't you, last year? And you said that they are, on Inspector Calls, less harsh on your AO2 and the use of terminology. As in, Inspector Calls doesn't massively go into like similes, onomatopoeia, because it's a play. There are metaphors, fire, blood, anguish, he's giving us the rope so that we'll hang ourselves, these kind of things, but...
You can afford to be, I'm not saying be narrative, but you can afford to be narrative to get to your point, because you've not got an extract in front of you. This is all from memory here. So you can afford to try and explain what you're trying to say in a bit of a narrative way, as long as you do get to the point eventually, like you are linking to the ideas and whatnot.
And the next little annotation down says consistent use of terminology. Well, you might look through this and go, terminology? Well, even here it's got foreshadowing is the word it's attached to. But it's got stage direction, the use of, later on it says, it conjures seemingly easy noun, upset. Is upset a noun? Adjective? I don't know.
Brains have gone.
Brains have gone, it's fine. Either way, there is... terminology in here, and even throughout.
Even character. Anytime you mention a character is a device. So you have to remember that these are constructions. These are crafted.
They're not real people.
They're not real people. They're meant to reflect people in society. So you can definitely say they're like a caricature of capitalism or whatnot. You can say things like that. But anytime you're referencing a character, you are using terminology because
definitely.
they're a device.
And I think I love that phrase. This essay doesn't use it, but I've also got another level 9 Sheila, which I'll upload if you'd like year 11. I'll put this on the VLE at the same place where this essay was. It's how and why does Sheila change? So it's such an easy essay, but what I've tried to do is take an easy question and go, how would you get top marks with something so easy? And consistently, she is a device. Priestley writes her this way. He's trying to make this character show. Because they're not real. They're not people. He's not writing non-fiction. He's creating these characters for a purpose. And that's a nice use of terminology.
And it's that's the thing in the mark scheme when they start to say, right, if they're just considering them to be like a character and it's not even that they start to think of them as like a construction. If you're just referencing and think, oh, this is exactly what life was like in society, well, of course it's going to reference it in some way. The moment you start to really consider that this is deliberate, this is a craft, you go into your level 4.
Definitely.
Where
They're making
becomes
decisions.
clear.
There's so many things in this that could not be coincidence.
No.
He's made a deliberate choice.
Yeah.
As we go through, you might notice as well, there's loads of references to the audience, and this also gets you AO2. So it's analysis of language, structure and form, used by the writer to create effects. So effect on the audience comes in there, but equally by addressing audience, you're addressing the form of a play, and you understand that people would be watching this. So it says both audience of post-war and modern day, and this essay actually looks at both, because you've got to understand, people in 1945 had needed something different from this play than we do, and see different things in it. So we will, like at the end of the essay, it says that we might actually view him in today as most to blame, because there's a lot on abusive relationships in our society nowadays. It's at the forefront of our understanding. Yet at this time the focus might be slightly different. So the comparing of the audiences is quite nice as well. Just to kind of go down, when we talk about that, too manly to be a dandy, well, it's quite an easy quotation. It's one that a lot of kids will focus on, but the way it's broken, like, he is a dandy, a well-bred gentleman with no how to dance, with no etiquette, that's a dandy, but he's too manly, so there's something unnerving, and the way that that's broken and makes him untrustworthy and as a dangerous character, despite the fact he appears to be the opposite. Because think about it, what is Gerald like at the beginning? He's described as too manly to be a dandy, but you see a dandy. There's nothing manly in the way that he speaks or anything.
No.
So there's a bit of danger. So where is that manly side? It's suggesting there's something untrustworthy about him yet to come. So it's quite perceptive. And just to move on to the end of the first paragraph, just the context at the end. The bit where it says means that the Burleys would be happy to overlook any misdemeanours. That's just mature phrasing. If you think about what that's saying, it says essentially, this is saying they want him to marry Sheila because of his class. That's quite obvious. That's fairly simple. But the way they've worded it, they want him to marry Sheila. Why do they want him to marry Sheila? Because of his class. Therefore, they're going to overlook it. Just the way it's been worded is a little bit more mature. And they're making that a bit better. Okay. As we move in, just a little phrase. During the inspector's interrogation, Gerald's untrustworthy nature seems to shine through even more. Even more just shows this is a continuation of an argument. It's developing on from paragraph 1. And it shows this is still going.
It's that link, isn't there? There's that link between the first and second paragraph, and that's what you want to see consistently.
You want to see that it's not, here's one isolated incident, and another isolated incident, and another isolated incident. This is there throughout, and it's the same thing we're seeing.
You want the thread to be there consistently, and that's the difference.
Is it the example they talk about, the golden thread of essays? It's more A-level, isn't it, the golden thread? What is keeping your answer together? Because answering the question isn't enough. Have you got, for 8 and 9, an argument you're making that is there throughout? And it's almost like your answer is tied together with it.
Like paper 2, when you get to paper 2, question 5, you have to have a line of argument that is consistent throughout. Because if you are going to throw it off and they're isolated, language paper 2, sorry, that would help.
It took me a minute. I'm sitting there going, there isn't a question. Language. Okay.
If there's an isolated kind of paragraph, if your paragraphs seem clunky, like you've just placed them without thinking about them, you're less likely to access those higher levels, because they want to see that you've clearly thought this out.
Yeah, as we go through as well, this bit where he talks about Alderman Megati, such a subtle moment that this candidate has taken and magnified, taken something, and that's perceptive. So that word, I often say you've got to look for the less obvious. Don't go for the downright obvious that everyone's going to pick. What can you argue? And this is where they've gone, hang on, Alderman Megati, that moment, maybe that's a slightly different story. We've seen Gerald lie before, maybe this is another lie. So it's really perceptive. Lots of candidates would overlook it. And then it goes on to mention a very generic quotation just to put in, because you want to have your quotations in there. Soft brown hair, big dark eyes. Generic, easy quotation, but here it's actually just used to back up a point. That's not the quotation that the candidate analyses. They're using that to go, that's why he wanted her. And it's nicely done. And then the next bit, I mean, it's all about this bit about Gerald on stage and the fact he can't actually doesn't really show much emotion. It's an interpretation of Gerald. It's not the only one, but it's argued well.
It is.
And therefore it works. And it does say here, you have to be confident in what you're saying to do this, because I think a lot of students could go in and try and do that and they won't make the mark.
No.
You've got to know, you've got a firm point, you're ready to make it, because that isn't necessarily the right answer of Gerald, that's an answer. So just considering stuff like that, some of this you might go, oh, that's really clever, I'm going to use that. Take that with very tentatively.
Yeah.
Because you could miss the mark quite easily.
Yes, you could, definitely.
Just moving into that last paragraph, and again, you'll see finally after the inspector leaves, well, we've got, and finally that little, that connective, it's showing the link again.
A discourse marker, they call it, don't they?
Discourse marker, that's the one. I couldn't think what it was called, and then it goes into talking about Gerald and his calculated plan, focusing on how to distance himself from the dead girl. I've just written there, this is very true. Have you ever considered it? In Act 3, he's quite emotionless. He's just like, is there any dead girl? He's and there's just something like that. Have you considered something that's a little bit more out there for your answer? Something to think about. The next bit of look on, the candidate never loses focus on the audience and their opinions. They're referenced in every single paragraph. Introduction, all 3 paragraphs, and the conclusion. It shows the audience, or this bit, which the characters we openly dislike. We is the audience. So you can see that they're constantly referring to them throughout. You know, I've written the Gerald is a catalyst for lack of responsibility, and just said, think about this for each character. Why are they in there? What's their purpose? Could Gerald be included in the story solely to ensure guilt isn't felt? And think about each of your characters. Why are they in there? What was Priestley doing? And this is any text, Macbeth, any text you're looking at.
Yeah.
Why include that character? What are they bringing to the table?
Yeah.
It's not always a positive thing. Again, simple quotations, everything's all right now, Sheila. He holds up the ring, but it's separated. The way that the candidate's gone, everything's all right now, but it's far from it. The way he holds up the ring. They've used a very generic quotation and then re-accept is symbolic, and they link that to the context. There's not a huge amount of context in here, but it's linked at every point. It's not so there you've linked context and AO2 together. It's good. It's very good.
It's like when we say about, like, obviously this isn't, Titanic would never come into a question like this.
No.
That's why you've got to be really careful with your context. Don't just throw it in or bolt it on at the end. If it's not relevant, don't include it. Like, don't try and frame your answer because, I know that the Titanic comes up, I've got to throw it in. Don't do it. You're better to focus on kind of audience context. If you can't remember anything, social context, as opposed to trying to make it match a question.
Yeah, I mean, the Titanic really is nice for kind of theme questions.
Yeah, when you can talk about it's kind of the destruction of society and the family, foreshadowing
and it's good for Mr. Burling.
Yeah.
But other than that,
you don't want to look at it in terms of like someone like Gerald.
No, it's not relevant. He's there when that's mentioned. He makes no reference to it at all.
Yeah.
So keep it there. It's the capitalist ideologies that his status and money. Well, that is capitalist ideologies. You could use that phrase Miss Gough used, that he is a caricature for capitalism, as is Mr. Burling. And that's context. So not a huge amount. Actually, you know what? Maybe if I were to make this essay better, I'd maybe suggest they put a little bit more context in there, because there's not a huge amount of pink. But then you get less marks for context than you do AO1 and AO2.
Yes.
So there should be less of it, really. And then at the end, just kind of putting about the arranged marriage, feigning love for her when their marriage is a business alliance, etc. You know, do audiences even realise this is an arranged marriage? Sheila is so adamant that it's love.
Yeah.
Oh, Gerald doesn't love her. He's had an affair. So just think about all of these kind of things. You know, don't overlook something like that. Just to kind of go at the end now. Just to look at that conclusion, it's just nicely worded. So Priestley's biggest triumph as a playwright is Gerald's manipulative actions extend to the audience.
Evaluating.
It's evaluative, and it's essentially all it's saying there is the audience are also fooled by him.
Yeah.
It's not groundbreaking.
No.
It's nothing. Oh my God, the audience don't like Gerald. No, of course the audience don't like Gerald, but they liked him at the beginning, so we were fooled by him.
Yeah.
Nothing groundbreaking, but it's just nicely worded.
Yeah.
It does address the obvious interpretations, despite some sympathy for him from the audience. Yes, we do feel sympathy for him in Act 2. It's not overlooking that. And then it goes on to say, and it references a quotation, that's a little reference, that even the inspector suggests he's earned. Doesn't need a quotation. The inspector does suggest it. It seems he's done little to warrant it, which means deserve. that sympathy. And it's this candidate's opinion that he's bad. Again, it's just very convincing that he feels the least amount of guilt and he's giving all that permission for other characters. Not the only interpretation, but it is very convincing. It's linking back to a previous paragraph. The context here, using context to hypothesise about the longevity of the characters. I love doing this, especially within the spectacles, going, so what would happen to them after? And I love using the context to think, Gerald does have far to fall. If this all comes out, Gerald is going to be, Sheila and Eric will probably be weirdly okay out of it. But Mr. Burling, Mrs. Burling, Gerald, they've got a lot to lose.
Yeah.
Their status, their maybe even their employment, all of these things. If it comes out like Mr. Burling is exploiting his workers and all of this, then they could lose everything.
It'd be a paranoia. It's kind of like the kind of things going on in society today, like the big names in Hollywood losing their status entirely.
Exactly.
With things that were just hidden under the carpet.
And
it would be like that.
Yeah, that Harvey Weinstein.
Yeah,
Look what's happened to him. He's completely ruined. Everything he's built is ruined. That could be the future of Mr. Burling, Mrs. Burling, and Gerald. Yeah. So it's quite nice to hypothesise at the end. Use your context and think, what would happen? I like to also think, truth of the matter is, Eric isn't a very clever boy. He's foolish. He's naive. He's going to war in a couple of years. What are the chances of someone like Eric surviving? I always think it's quite unlikely. Whereas someone like Gerald, I imagine, will probably manipulate his way to the top and get himself a nice, comfortable position as an officer. I just think these kind of things, and just nice to put in a conclusion, hypothesise about where they go. And the final sentence, unscrupulous just means like untrustworthy. It's just a synonym for it. So it's referencing the question specifically. It's referring back to that introduction, that he's so untrustworthy that he probably won't be held responsible. And it's just going back to that thesis idea. I don't know what I'd give it. I've got a mark scheme sitting here, but in all honesty, I think with something like this, you'd struggle not to put it into the
top band at least.
Yeah, so it's around that 8 or 9 mark. Yeah. But like I say, because we've gone heavily through a document with this, if you've made it this far and you haven't had the document, I don't know how you followed it, quite frankly. So do make sure you download it. What I will also do now this is over, I'm just going to chuck up a Sheila response. It's not annotated, it's not highlighted, but it's a Sheila response that would get a 9. Honestly, I don't think Sheila will be the question because she was the question last year, so I'd be surprised if she came up. I think it was this question almost exactly that came up. So, I'd be very surprised if you got Sheila. But it's something to learn from and look at a simple question and how you might push yourself towards that top end. Hope you found this useful, guys. Sorry it's not as witty. Sorry there's no Mr. Grimmett to make you laugh.
No, sorry.
It's very factual, but again, hopefully just really useful for you as you revise at home and do any practice questions. Have a lovely weekend. Bye.
Bye.